Welcome back to The Full View. It's time for Explain and Verify, and Samgele Maseko is here.
Indeed, Tembegile, tonight we look at South Africa's rail network of more than 20,000 kilometers, which is the largest in Africa. Transnet freight rail alone transport close to 30% of the country's freight annually. The rest is managed manually by a road. That is the company that ultimately is the network that supports regional integration of economies of member countries of the Southern African Development Community. By size alone, that doesn't equal efficiency. The real challenge remains in keeping the trains moving of this particular entity, which is Transnet. Freight rail volumes have plunged from 226 million tons of goods transported in the 2017-28 financial year to 552 million tons by 2024. Coal, iron ore and manganese are the top exports. Yet, despite a fleet of over 2,300 locomotives, more than 71,000 wagons and nearly 27,000 workers, the state-owned entity is struggling. In recent years, aging equipment, underinvestment and theft have left the ravaged railways within the country, particularly after COVID-19. So there's railways, they were particularly dilapidated. If you look at the rail line, particularly that moves from Gauteng going towards Polokwane, going towards Vembe in the Limpopo province, that was severely vandalized, which will also ultimately affect the plans of Premier Panyaza Lesufi of that bullet train that will see that particular system of Transnet also being integrated in having that particular bullet train to transport the many residents of Gauteng who are also residents of Limpopo who are working within this province, but also have families in Limpopo who travel particularly on a month end to use that particular bullet train, or those using business, having business between Polokwane, Johannesburg, going to other areas of Musina as well, and Vembe, who may be using that particular project of that bullet train of the Premier. Then you go to a province like KwaZulu-Natal, that network that cuts from Durban, going right up and towards Stanger, Richards Bay. That particular line has been vandalized as well. Hence, also Transnet rails, Transnet locomotives cannot be moving towards that particular part. But if you look at the fight of the Transnet annual freight railway volumes, as I had said earlier, 2017-2028 financial year, 226 million transported. Then there was a drastic dip going towards 2023-2024 financial year, 152 million tons transported through the Transnet network there.
And Samgele, in terms of the actual use of the rail infrastructure, so the tracks, etc., what does that look like at the moment? You reference what is not currently in use.
Well, look, since 1994, more than 3,600 kilometers of track has fallen into disuse, and between 2019 and 2023, over 4,600 kilometers of copper cable was stolen. Corruption and poor leadership at the state-owned enterprise have also somewhat derailed Transnet operations. In June, former Transnet executives, including Brian Molefe, Anuj Singh, Siyabonga Gama, and Tamsanqa Chiyane, appeared in court on state capture-related fraud and corruption charges. A month later, Transnet won a bid to stop a Chinese supplier from disposing of parts that could service 120 locomotives that are currently inactive. This is tied to a controversial 54 billion rands deal to purchase more than 1,000 trains back in 2013. And when the company reported a 7.3 billion rands in losses last year, experts like transport economist Professor Jan Havenga warned that efficiency remains Transnet's biggest problem. For instance, come here, this is Transnet's infrastructure challenges. 3,636 kilometers of track fallen into disuse from 1994 to 2023. 4,633 kilometers of copper cables stolen from 2019 to 2023. That ultimately affects a number of those products of iron ore, manganese that are exported as raw dust from South Africa going to the international markets, particularly if you look at some of these products that are going towards South African ports. Transnet, some of the companies that are operating within exporting this iron ore and manganese have also taken legal action on Transnet for failing on their legal obligations to provide this particular service to South Africans. And this has ultimately left this particular entity in ruins, and hence this time around you've seen the Minister of Transport, Barbara Creecy, trying to introduce private sector players. I think it's about 11 companies or 7 companies that have been brought on board to be able to operate those Transnet rail lines in order to have their locomotives running on those lines in order to ease up economic growth and to have that public-private partnerships within that particular sector.
And what does that mean? I mean, that's just part of it, right? Because ultimately what is needed is a slightly bigger, shall we say, sort of turnaround plan?
There is a bigger turnaround plan that is ultimately needed, but looking at South Africa's financial problems at this point in time, the fiscus is not performing well. There's not enough revenue being generated by the South African government through the South African Revenue Services. The tax base has shrinked over a period of time and has not expanded due to the sluggish economy and lack of job creation that is there within the country. But let's just listen to an economist who spoke on this particular issue of Transnet and what he had to say on the deficiencies of this particular state-owned enterprises before we get to Minister Barbara Creecy.
I think what's more important is the fact that our economy loses R1 billion a day because of the fact that Transnet cannot deliver the service that it's supposed to deliver. I think what's more important that if Transnet worked at optimal efficiency last year, we would have had GDP growth of maybe 4 or 5% more.
Transport Minister Barbara Creecy has tasked the turnaround of Transnet. She's been trying to turn around this entity. Government's goal is to move 250 million tons by rail each year. And to get there, 11 private operators have now been granted conditional access to the network. This is an issue that has been a hot potato, Tembegile, for political parties, particularly within the National Executive Committee of the African National Congress, the largest party within the Government of National Unity. It's an issue that the Democratic Alliance has been pushing heavily to bring in these private sector players. I saw Dean McPherson, the Minister of Public Works and Infrastructure within the country, applauding Minister Barbara Creecy for this particular stance of bringing in these private sector players, 11 of them, to operate these particular networks, to have their locomotives running in the Transnet freight rail infrastructure. And it will also improve the infrastructure that government has been so dearly wanting for. There was an issue at some point of BOP, Build, Operate, Transfer, BOT, that government tried to introduce under President Ramaphosa. So this is going to be an interesting project on how they roll it out, looking at the policy discrepancies and the policy disagreements that are there within the Government of National Unity, particularly when it comes to turning around these state-owned enterprises that are ailing. But let's listen to what Minister Barbara Creecy had to say.
Our target is that by 2029, we've got to be moving 250 million tons of freight on the Transnet network. At the moment, we are moving something in the region of about 160 million tons a year. This means that there is 90 million tons that needs to be moved, but currently Transnet doesn't have the capacity to move it. So the 11 operators that we announced today will be operating across the priority freight corridors. They will be moving mining commodities, agricultural commodities, and general containers, freight containers.
Stakeholders welcome private operators to stabilize exports and to create jobs, but Transnet's finances remain under pressure. The National Treasury is expected to extend a further 16.4 billion rands in guarantees. Chief Executive Officer Michelle Phillips addressed concerns about the privatization of the state-owned enterprises, which has been a very topical issue within the political parties within the country, the economic freedom fighters, the ANC, the MK party, most of them whom are against bringing in private sector players to operate some of these infrastructures of state-owned enterprises, have warned against a wholesale of these state-owned enterprises, which President Ramaphosa has said there is no wholesale of state-owned enterprises, but there is bringing in private sector players with capital to help with the balance sheets of these state-owned enterprises and for the efficiency of South Africa's exports into the international markets. Let's just listen to what the Chief Executive Officer of Transnet had to say.
the fact that we are allowing private sector into our business is not a sign of any demise. In fact, it is progress. And I think we need to celebrate that progress. The business is stable and we are continuing to, break records on a daily basis in the ports and even on the rail line. So we are continuing to do the best that we can to support the movement of freight in the country. And, the acceptance that we also need the private sector to support us does not mean that we are privatizing anything. Government remains the owner of this asset.
All things considered, Transnet is critical to South Africa's trade, but its challenges continue to test the country's locomotive's backbone. With new operators entering the network, the coming years will test whether collaboration can finally put South Africa's freight back on track. That's it for tonight, Tembegile. But the issue of Transnet is a really thorny issue within the country. Once a shining state-owned enterprises, went through an era of state capture and corruption, allegedly. But you've seen those who are in court, you've seen the allegations, but no one has been brought to book as yet. But they are saying that the wheels of justice take a long time. And we'll definitely see what will happen in a few years' time. But what we have seen in the past with some of these cases that have been bundled by the National Prosecuting Authority, we don't know yet whether justice will be brought, but we do know that Transnet is an important player in the development of the country. As they say, state-owned enterprises are meant to play a developmental role within the country. And as of the past 15 or so years, they have not been playing that developmental role that they are meant to play.
Samgela, we hope the turnaround actually yields the desired results. For now, thank you very much. Samgela Masego with another edition of Explain and Verify here on SABC News.